Bienvenue, welcome to the 5th webinar of the TDO6 International Conference. Launched in Montreal in 2008, the TDO Symposium series brings together French-speaking countries on the issues of opioid dependence. The first editions of this conference were held in Paris in 2010, in Geneva in 2012, in Brussels in 2014, and in Rabat in 2016. The 6th edition is exclusively online due to the current global context and is under the theme of the dialogue between science and experiential knowledge. The TDO6 conference aims to exchange cutting-edge knowledge in the treatment of opioid-related disorders in order to learn from them and integrate them into healthcare and clinical settings to recognize the relevance and the importance of experiential knowledge. My name is Nancy Worth. I'm a clinical supervisor at the Kahnawake Shakottia'takehnhas Community Services for the addiction services. I am also a certified addiction counselor and trauma counselor. I have over 20 years experience in the field of addiction counseling and mental health. And I've been in this position of clinical supervisor for roughly 2 years. And I've been on the team at the addiction services in Kahnawake for over 18 years, providing assessments and counseling, case management, referrals, and aftercare services. I've also assisted in creating the opioid task force here in Kahnawake, and it's been a privilege for me to work with a lot of the speakers that you will hear today. Today's webinar is on Indigenous realities. This is a webinar which scientific experts, clinical experts, and people with experiential knowledge will meet on issues of Indigenous realities in the context of opioid use. Different services, experiences, and clinical approaches will be presented to you today. As with previous webinars, the main objectives of this presentations are to, 1, create a space for exchange on cutting-edge knowledge, and to recognize and integrate experiential knowledge into research, clinical practices, and public policies. In order for things to run smoothly in this presentation today, here are some details that you might need. So we're live and definitely not immune to technical issues or difficulties. And speakers also just remember to turn on your cameras and microphones only when you're doing your part of the presentation. Also for the members of the public, if you have any questions or you want to post some questions at the end, please use the question answer function that's at the bottom of your window. Questions will be directed to the speakers during the discussion period at the end only of the webinar. If people do want to use your microphones to ask a question, you can specify that in the chat. And please do not use the chat function to ask the actual questions. The webinar will be recorded and should be available to replay on the Institut Universitaire sur les Dépendances YouTube channel. There will possibly be a break halfway through the webinar. And also, you may already have the link to in the chat to fill out the event evaluation. Our next speaker is Nakuset. Nakuset is the executive director of the Native Women's Shelter in Montreal. She's Cree from Lac La Ronge in Saskatchewan. Nakuset created, produced, and hosted the television series Indigenous Power. She was voted Women of the Year in 2014 by the Montreal Council of Women, and she is the Indigenous columnist for Ma TV City Life. Nakuset was featured in Real Talk on Race, the award-winning CBC series. In 2017, She was selected by the CKX City Series as speaker and shift disturber due to the work that she does to shift the status quo for urban Aboriginal women. In November 2017, she was the speaker for TEDx Montreal Women. In 2018, she testified for the Vien Commission, a public inquiry into the discrimination of Indigenous people of Quebec. She testified in June 2018 at the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Inquiry in Calgary. And in February 2019, she presented at We Day. She was recently featured in the end of 2010 interview of Global to discuss the past decade work with the urban Indigenous community. She is honored to have spearheaded and run the Cabot Square project since its inception and to co-found Résilience Montreal. She is dedicated to improving the lives of urban Indigenous people. She will present on the historical context and Aboriginal realities in Montreal.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'm just going to share my screen. Oh boy, sorry, my screen sort of disappeared. Just give me 1 second. Okay, let me try that again. Sorry for the delay. Here we go. All right. So the presentation is called Givers of Hope. Sorry, I just have some technical difficulties. Here we go. Okay. So yeah, sorry about that. So it's called Givers of Hope, and someone within this group, this community that I'm working with, that I prepared with, actually gave it this name. So I can't take credit for the name, but it's I think it's quite significant. And what I wanted to do first was just go over a little bit of historical context, and then discuss the current realities that we're facing, how we adapted in the urban Indigenous community to COVID, and also some awareness about what is going on with Indigenous people. So just skip to the next one. Sorry. I'm not exactly sure how you remove this chat bar, but I can't seem to get to my PowerPoint.
Nakuset, you can just have to go at the slideshow.
Yeah, but you see this, the thing on top is hiding where it says slideshow. That's the problem.
Do you want to share for you?
Pardon me?
Do you want I share for you the PowerPoint?
I don't think I sent it to you. I updated it since I spoke. How do I remove this? Oh, sorry, got it. I removed that. And now I go to slideshow. Turn slide, okay. All right, sorry about that, guys. Here we go. All right, so I think that, you know, there was a time when, before the Europeans came to Canada, where we lived in a harmonious kind of way. We were self-sufficient, and things were going well until, you know, the settlers arrived. And I think at the beginning, we were able to get along to a certain extent, and there's an enormous amount of information about, the history, and I encourage you to look into it. But, it sort of got to a point where the values that the Indigenous people had, the values that the Europeans had, did not match, and a way for the sort of government to oversee was to create different kinds of policies and create treaties. So this was difficult for us because it was done by force. And there are a lot of ways that they accomplished this, the Europeans. So one of them was killing the way of life. Once you kill the way of life, then we do become dependent on the government. And I guess when they started to create the treaties, we were sort of forced onto reservations, and we were displaced. So, like I said, there's an enormous amount of information on this. The next step was also control of the reservation. So they used to have Indian agents that were put onto every single community, and they weren't allowed to leave unless they had a pass. So I encourage you also to look into that. And that ended in 1960, which is really not very long ago. So if we are forced to live on a small piece of land and we're not allowed to leave the community, we're not allowed to hunt, we're not allowed to trade or be self-sustaining, anything like that, we are now considered dependent on the government. And myself, I am from Lac La Ronge. I'm Treaty 6. When my community signed with, the Queen, the government, it was decided that, and I believe it was in 1876, that, each band member would receive $5 a year. That's our treaty money from it. 1876, which still stands. We still just get that $5. And then there were all other kinds of, agreements between the Queen and my Cree community. And one of those things were schools. So the government felt that if they were to remove the children and put them into residential schools, then they would lose their Indian status, and then the government would no longer be having to honor these treaties. So I'm going to talk a tiny bit about that, but I just wanted to sort of demonstrate what it was like for killing the way of life. So if you look at this picture, and this was done in the United States and Canada. So as someone who's Cree from Saskatchewan, our people used to chase the buffalo. Well, if you kill the way of life and that we can no longer be, we can no longer have our food source, it's easier to become dependent on the government. So this is something that was very much encouraged throughout Canada and the United States. And it was a lot easier for us to sort of just turn to the government because we wanted to feed our children and our families. And it is not just, the Cree communities that face this. We also know that the Inuit had a similar experience, only their experience was the dog slaughter. So if you see in this image, when the Inuit would go hunting, they would be led by their dogs on a sled. Well, the RCMP decided, and the government, that they would go into the communities between 1950 and 1970. They decided to kill every single dog. The Inuit people refer to this as kimit, which is their language for the dog slaughter, and they are very much affected. I think that anyone who actually has a dog, if you had to explain to your family that someone is going to come tomorrow and kill your dog, how would that how would your family deal with that? How would you even understand that? But then it's more difficult because your dog is also someone that you rely on to go hunting. Now, So what has happened is that there are very few dogs in the community, and currently, if they want to go hunting, they have to decide whether or not they'll take their money to either put it into gas so that they can put it into their skidoos and go hunting, or whether or not they're going to go up to the store. Now you have to understand that all the food now is brought up by plane, and it is very, very, very expensive. Today, I was looking, through my Twitter feed, and I noticed that they are selling a pumpkin in the Inuit community for $65. And it's not even a fresh pumpkin. It's already starting to decay. That's what it's like living in the community. So what happens is that a lot of the Inuit communities come down to Montreal. They come down specifically because there's not enough services up there in terms of medical or educational. So they come to Montreal and they are just wowed by the fact that there seems to be so much housing, and there seems to be opportunity, and things are so much more cheaper. So it seems like a really good idea, only because of the systemic discrimination that we face. They usually end up on the streets. So residential schools happened. That was part of the government policy, and they started really at the turn of the century, and they closed the last school in 1997. There was an enormous amount of abuse that happened at residential schools. My mother went to residential school. She went to the Prince Albert Residential School. And most of the women that come to the Native Women's Shelter are either directly descendants or survivors of residential school, or their mothers were. So, and I actually have one of my staff that is a survivor of residential school. So what I wanted to talk about now was some of the current realities. So when I talked about how, a lot of Indigenous people end up coming to Montreal, there is something like easily 50,000 Indigenous people living in the cities. And that is from all nations, not just 11 nations that are here in Quebec, but others from different provinces that have come in for opportunities. The problem is that there's so much systemic racism that when people go to treatment centers, they are often turned away. And when they're turned away, they usually die. And because I have, in Montreal, I have the opportunity to speak to different reporters, and I kind of share with them about what is going on. So this is, if you look at this slide, you'll see the name Christopher Curtis. This is someone that I have spoken to in the past when I need to bring some kind of awareness about what is going on, because this particular article was someone who stayed at the shelter and then she died, and I was really outraged. So Christopher wrote an article about it. Also in the Cabot Square area, there used to be a service there called the Open Door, and they left the area. They were actually forced out of the area. And we were very concerned that, such an important service, once it leaves, what would happen? And what happened was that within 4 months of the organization leaving the area, we had about 10 deaths. And about 8 of those were of Indigenous people. And, as an executive director, I was able to speak to different politicians and speak to different, city officials, and try to send funding agents, a letter letting them know about what was going on and seeing whether or not there was any monies that I could apply for. And everything fell through. And it was really discouraging. So what I did was I went back to see Christopher, and I explained to him what was going on in Montreal, because, I have the project in Cabot Square, and it's very discouraging to see our people pass away and that nothing is being done. And what worked for me was asking him to write this article, because if you look at the date, it says May 23rd, 2019. Well, a couple of days later, because of the article, all of a sudden, the city seems to wake up and notice that there's an issue and is willing to give money to create some kind of service in the area. So this was really incredibly helpful. And when I sat with the different committees to talk about what that solution could be, it didn't seem like anyone was ready to sort of step up and create something. But I took because I already sounded the alarm and then nobody was willing to kind of do anything about it. I was like, okay, I'll do something. And, you know, it was in May that the city said that they were going to give us money. It gave me a little bit of time to sort of think about what is needed in the area and what could really be a service that was focused on Indigenous people, but also allowed non-Indigenous people to use the service as well. And I have been working at the Native Women's Shelter for over 20 years. So I know that, you know, there are a couple of women that when I first started at the shelter, that I still see them after 20 years. They've been on and off the streets for 20 years. And I don't know how they've survived. And what I decided with my group was to name the next organization that the city was willing to fund as Resilience Montreal, because basically what we're saying is that we recognize that you've been on the streets for 20 years plus, and we welcome you. And we see that you are resilient. And we also made sure that it was written in Inuktitut. It doesn't actually say resilience because they don't have that word in their language, but it is something similar, almost like a home away from home. So that is our logo. So a lot of times, you know, Indigenous people create their own solutions, and this was really one of the solutions. This is where Resilience currently stands. We found this restaurant that was across the street from Cabot Square. It was a real dive, but we were able to get the expertise from Bruno Demer, who is the Architecture Sans Frontières, and I was able to give him a vision of what I wanted, and then he created it. So these are just some pictures. And, you know, we call Resilience a wellness center for the homeless, because there's this sort of conception that when you have a shelter for people, that, you know, usually being in a basement and just a granola bar would be sufficient. But what we wanted was to make the place beautiful and feel homey and offer an enormous amount of services. Because of the systemic discrimination, a lot of times people aren't allowed to access it. We were going to be bringing a lot of these services in, but we wanted to make it feel like home. So we were able to get like 150 volunteers that came in and made the place beautiful. So these are just some pictures of the transformation. You know, changing the colors, getting rid of the disgusting carpets, putting down tiles, brightening it up. And eventually we had a grand opening. So we literally opened the doors. We got the notification in May that we could we can have this service, and then finding the location, we opened in November, which is very quick, but that was the whole point. Once we figured out we had a place, we really put an enormous amount of effort to make it ready for them, because it's starting to get cold now in November in Montreal, and we wanted to get people off the streets and have them allow them to have a safe space. This is also the grand opening. The woman in the middle is the mayor of Montreal, so she was also there to, you know, do the ribbon cutting ceremony. So Resilience is currently dog friendly. And we have an enormous amount of community members that come in. We have just different pictures of different people that are in. We serve up to about 900 meals a day. And we also make sure that we, on a weekly basis, that we have country food, which is the Inuit, their food. We find a distributor in Montreal, or we have it flown up from the community. So every week they have that. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about, because all those pictures I just showed you were before COVID, right? So when COVID hit, what happened in Montreal, and I guess around all of the world, was that everything shut down. And what was difficult was Resilience Montreal was the last organization to shut down. So we were trying to figure out, how do we service the people without doing it in a safe manner? So when all the other shelters closed down, we noticed that everyone was coming to see us. And then pretty soon there were so many people in the building. We were trying to figure out how we could continue to service without having like the health authorities come and shut us down, because there's so many people in, we couldn't do any social distancing. So we didn't want to let the people down. And we said, you know what we'll do? We'll go outside. And I was thinking about the TB epidemic, where, people were outside, on beds with blankets. I kind of, said that to the city, like, why don't we do something like that? But what we actually did was we just took everything out to the park across the street at Cabot Square. So what we did was we brought out all the food, and we brought out a table where we had all the different clothing and different things that they would need. We put up a couple of tents. And I remember that, the city was like, what are you doing? Like, you can't do this. And I'm like, well, I don't see what the alternative is, because no one is servicing the population. So probably about 5 days later, the city decided that this is considered a best practice. And then they also got involved. So all the blue tents is just when we were doing it. Suddenly we have red tents because the city decided that they were going to help out. They were going to bring in, the Red Cross. They were going to distribute some of the food. Resilience made all the food, but we also did a lot of awareness, because you have to understand the homeless population were not getting the updates that all the rest of the world were getting, because everyone's inside their home. And they're outside on the streets, and they may not have access to, phones or computers to run. So what we did was every single tent, we would give them a message that you were hearing throughout the world, right? We also, would put up messages about, where they can go to sleep, or other additional places where they could eat, or different, just different services about testing or whatever. We always offered this information. And, this is Sam, during the holidays, like, when they had Easter, we did our own Easter hunt, because, you have to understand that people that are homeless don't get to celebrate, but we gave them opportunities to celebrate. We made incredible food. I mean, people would walk by and they would smell the barbecue and be like, what are you doing? I'm like, it's for the homeless population. And, we had an enormous amount of volunteers that came in and brought in like delicious food. Like, if you can offer anything, usually, the hierarchy of needs, is like, food and place to rest. So we made sure that the food was fantastic, because it was the least we can do besides the services. Now I'm going to jump into a different thing that was going on here in Montreal. There was a woman named Joyce Echequan, and she went to the hospital because she was in enormous amount of pain, and the nurse at the hospital was so disrespectful to her that Joyce decided to capture the conversations on camera, and that was seen globally. Joyce ended up dying. And I remember at the Native Women's Shelter, 2 of my staff came in, and they were just besides themselves. They were just so angry, and they're like, we don't know what to do. Like, someone has to do something. So you have to understand, in Montreal at that time, it was considered the red zone. So you're not allowed to go out, you're not allowed to do any kind of protests. But because of the way everyone was feeling so incredibly outraged and helpless, we decided that we were going to do a march. And I did a lot of information sort of on the news, talking about it, trying to bring people out, trying to get really incredible speakers to come out and to give some kind of message of hope. And we were more successful than I ever thought, because I really didn't expect during this time, because it was considered really like illegal to protest, right? How many people would show up? But we had so many people that showed up. I was just like beside myself. And I think this is really important, because once we did this march, afterwards, and not even afterwards, maybe 5 minutes before we ended up closing, CBC came up to me and said, we just want to let you know that the government has announced an inquest into Joyce Echaquan's death. And I totally credit all the people that came to this march, because actions speak louder than words. And when people saw how many people showed up, the government had to take notice and be like, okay, well, it's not just a small group of Indigenous people that are concerned, it's a large amount of people. So, I mean, what's difficult is that, you know, you don't have to do these kinds of things, but it's really important to do these kinds of things. And, you know, this was a march that was done in a really respectful manner, that we had social distancing, that everything went off really, really well. And then, you know, not too long ago, we started hearing about, you know, the mass graves. And that really hits you. And I think as Indigenous people, we're always dealing with a tsunami of devastating news. So besides what our living current reality is, and then having to hear about other things that are going on across Canada, it really affects us. And something else that happened in Montreal was that during COVID, there was an Innu man named Raphael, and he didn't have a place to stay. The government here in Canada, in Quebec, decided that there was going to be a curfew so that everyone had to be inside their homes as of 8 o'clock. People who are homeless don't have any place to go. They were going to be potentially ticketed. And this poor guy didn't have any place to go, went into a porta potty and froze to death. And I had been talking for a really long time about having a really warm tent where people can go if they couldn't find any place else. Michelle Odette sent me this picture and said, I'll send you a Shakottia'takehnhas. And then we were just really prepared to create a warming tent in the name of Raphael Andre. So this is the tent that we created. And when I say created, it was actually a city of Montreal that gave us this tent, but we needed to find staff to be in the tent, and also to have food in the tent and extra clothing. And we were able to get the Innu Nation, the Mohawk Nation, all these different nations came together and gave money. They gave resources, staff. It was really unbelievable. And if you can imagine, you know, we had workers that came 3 hours away from Quebec City to come in a snowstorm to help the people. So we call the Raphael Andre Memorial Tent, and it is still standing. All right. So we opened it on February the 3rd, and we have had probably 18,000 people who have visited since. And we're in the process of trying to find a permanent location. And this is, we had an opening ceremony. So we had a Mohawk elder that came in just to say some words to open the space in a good way. This is one of the staff that came down. She's Innu, all the way from Quebec City. And there's only 18 spaces, so you have to understand that there's an enormous amount of people outside. So a lot of the staff are outside offering food, offering support. And we've had, you know, our intervention workers have been able to place people in addiction centers as well as into apartments. So they go really over and beyond to help the population that arrives. So I was mentioning before about the fact that we have, we heard about, you know, the 215 children from Kamloops, and then the 751 children from Saskatchewan that were found in mass graves. And because, you know, I do a lot of these gatherings, I was asked if I could do another one. And I honestly didn't feel like I had the strength to do another one. But if people ask me to do one, then I'm able to coordinate it. And we decided to do this on July 1st, because that's Canada Day here in Canada. And it's not really a day of celebration for Indigenous people. And we thought it would be really fitting to have a protest. And the idea was to bring in a lot of knowledge keepers and, you know, all Indigenous speakers and singers to come in and just sort of make sense of what is this, what is going on, and how do we get out of bed the next day. So this is Kevin Deere. I'm holding the microphone where he is sharing with the enormous amount of people. Apparently, there was something like 10,000 people that showed up on this day. And, you know, it was mostly non-Indigenous people that showed up, right? And people who came said that they really were comforted and honored to be there and humbled to be there, and they learned something, and that is really what we need to do. This is another picture of, you know, us walking down the street. And then just recently, the Canadian government decided that September 30th was going to be the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. So again, I was asked if I would do something. So I said, absolutely. So this is, you know, what we were able to do, we're bringing in actual survivors to come and speak, as well as other speakers. And we were able to work with the Assembly of First Nations of Quebec and Labrador. So they also had some speakers and singers to bring awareness to this. And again, we invited people to come out and to share what this day means. And for whatever reason in Canada, it's considered a legal holiday, but non-Quebec. So, you know, we're hoping that by next year that it'll be recognized as an actual holiday. Although personally, I prefer that June 21st, which is National Indigenous Peoples Day, that be a holiday as opposed to Truth and Reconciliation, which is more affiliated with residential schools. I don't think we need to celebrate residential schools. I think we live with it every single day. But anyway, that's the government. And that's it. Basically, this is the kind of work that I do, and I try to step up every time I have an opportunity to address different Indigenous needs. And I thank you very much for listening to me. And again, I apologize for the beginning. It was a little bit choppy there, but you know, I'm not so techie. So thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Nakuset. Thank you for your powerful voice and the amazing work that you do every day. Our next speaker is Mrs. Hazel Mayo. She is also my work colleague. Hazel is a proud Mohawk woman from Kahnawake. She is a person in recovery, and she's working for over 26 years at the Kahnawake Shakottia'takehnhas community services. She's working in addiction, mental health, and trauma. In her community, she participates in ceremonies, powwow, work, and that's just to mention a few of the activities that she does. Hazel will be presenting on the work that we do here at the Kahnawake Shakottia'takehnhas Community Services in the opioid use disorders, and we'll also be talking about the opioid task force.
Okay, my turn. Thank you very much. I'm just going to prepare myself. Okay. So I just wanted to also thank Nyo and Nakuset for sharing your wisdom. I'm going to follow in her, following in what she talked about in the history of colonization. So first, I just want to thank Nancy for the introduction. And my part on this team will describe from an outpatient treatment setting. We are seated on Mohawk territory, and we're an organization that offers prevention intervention services. I am bundled up in a team with a wonderful supervisor, which is our moderator, Nancy Worth, along with 3 addiction specialists, John Mayo, Alana Burns, Zoe Brown. We have a prevention addictions worker, Cara Dibo, and we're also fortunate to have 2 Yale students, Joe Roy and Cody Martin. Each member on our team has their own disciplines on how they support clients with opioids, individually, family and community supports. My understanding of incorporating traditional and Western modalities is to understand the role of traditional medicine in treating addictions. This requires learning the systemic repression carried out during colonization. Colonization led to the loss of meaning for many Gayageha Mohawk people, who in their attempt to deal with the intergenerational pain, seek to self-medicate through alcohol, substance abuse such as opioids. The hopelessness and powerlessness that followed was for self-medication. So we ask, why? So we have survived colonization, acculturation, assimilation. We survived residential, Indian-based school, suicides, rape, abandonment, neglect. Our homes are past. The past 500 years testify to our skill at waging the struggle. For with all the varied weapons of extinction pointed at our heads, we endure. So the organization goal is to help identify culturally appropriate values, principles, and spirituality, which are to be reflected in the services we offer to the community. As our understanding of the community wellness deepens, we have powerful teachings of the 4 directions and 4 colors. Culture is treatment, and all healing is spiritual. The outcome of this approach, therefore, has been overwhelmingly positive. The next slide demonstrates how we support families, community, and the healing process. These 4 components of the sacred circle seek greater understanding of self by allowing self to explore the spiritual space for one existence in Mother Earth, molding who we are and etching our souls into being Mohawk beings. Culture fashions identity, but critical to life and identity, and is building the bundle of knowledge that will unfold in one's life journey. So we're just going to describe a little bit about how the circle, and that the circle, as you can read, is the circle is a symbol of independence, wholeness, completeness, that gives energy, vitality, healing, strength, and unity. The circle represents the journey through life. The circle of life that begins at conception with the creation of new life. So when we talk about the north, the color is white, which also represents the white population. And the gift is from our Creator. From the north brings spirituality, and the element is rock. From the element, we learn inner strength and faith. The rock symbolizes individuals' responsibility for their own healing, take action, and mobilize the community around the issues of opioids. For the east, the color is yellow, which represents the yellow population, and the gift is the beginning of new life. From the east brings strength, and the element is trees. So the tree teaches us to be honest, to persevere. Like the tree, we must learn to build our own life first. And the eastern door houses the gift of vision. So as frontline workers, we need to establish a strong vision, begin with the basic awareness of what the broad issues are that relates to the opioids. From the south, the color is red, which represents the red population, and the gift is direction and discipline teachings. The element is sweetgrass. The sweetgrass teaches us to be kind and caring. Establishing relationship means taking time to make connection with those affected by opioids, as well as those who love and support them as well. So from the west, the color is black, which represents the Black population, and the gift is protection and support. The element is animals, who gives us the greatest gift of all, the lessons of sharing. Here, you will use the gift of reason based on existing knowledge around the opioids. So that is this. This is the part of a tool that we use in helping the teachings. So the next slide is the title of my presentation is A New Light into Dark History. So the new light into dark history, metaphorically, the statement has deep meaning. We support the family and community in examining, exploring, reflecting, and engaging in these transformation stages of understanding themselves through the opioid healing journey. So the good mind is another visual representation of the 7 attributes of life experiences that form the good mind. The outer circle is the 7 teachings. The second circle is 7 stages of life that are sources of teachings as well. Compassion and love are the foundational teachings of encouragement. With these teachings come the good mind. These teachings and values come from stories, ceremonies, the gift of the Creator, like our creation story, great law, and our Thanksgiving address. And also it relates to Sonia for beginning our meeting with the Thunderbird, the Thanksgiving address, which as Mohawk people, we start every meeting with the Thanksgiving address, which is the Thunderbird, which means lets us bring our minds together as one and greet and thank the people. In our culture as Mohawk, we are been given that gift to be able to do, we don't pray, we give thanks. And in our Thanksgiving address, we are responsible for doing things for all of what we talked about. White population, Black population, male population, and white population. So that is our responsibility. So that's the reason why we begin every meeting with that Thanksgiving address. So in keeping with our theme of incorporating traditional and Western modalities, we are fortunate that we have an opioid task force that offers support made up of different disciplines. So our opioid task force, prevention intervention committee service team is made up of addiction supervisor, which is Nancy, who's the moderator, the addiction prevention worker, which is on our team is Kara, and then we also have the Kahnawake Memorial Director of Nursing. There are 2 local pharmacists, Dr. Watt and as well as Dr. Fuller. So this team offers support to the families as well as interventions needed for community. So as you can see on the screen, they offer kits for families. They also network with other organizations and hospitals. They have harm reduction pop-up booths as well as promotional services. So yeah, so we're very fortunate to have a task force. So they take care of a lot of issues on a community level. So that's all. And then we're very fortunate to have external support services with the CHUM and their team. So Dr. Marsan has been instrumental to supporting our clients, especially in crisis. We are very grateful for the support that we have received. The CHUM is an addiction medicine service team, was able to service a telemedicine clinic that partnered with Indigenous health and wellness centers during the COVID-19 pandemic, has had a significant repercussion on our daily life as well as on our health. So we know that during these uncertain times for our communities, the addiction medicine services at the CHUM using telemedicine technology as a means to provide much needed addiction resource. The benefits of the telemedicine platform with the support for Dr. Marsan and her team of nurses and doctors. The aim was to minimize the barrier to care which have inevitably resulted from the current coronavirus situation. So we're grateful for the relationship and the care for our clients from the CHUM. And so so presently right now I have a client that I'm working with the CHUM as well as with 2 other doctors, a psychiatrist, and this client was at the withdrawal management program at the CHUM, and they have titrated him from the methadone to the new injection of Suboxone, and it's been absolutely a wonderful partnership and relationship. The client is doing extremely well, and that's all thanks to all of the networking with other professionals that we have this opportunity to work with. So for myself, That's the end of, this concludes my presentation. So I just want to thank everyone for being part of this wonderful team. Thank you. Yeah, well.
Thank you, Hazel. Thank you for all that information and for sharing. And I do have to say that our team and all our different partners work very well together. I want to just again say thank you for all the amazing collaboration that we do. Like I said, we feel very fortunate to have a lot of resources working together on this issue of opioid dependence. Our next presenter or guest speaker is Mr. Tim. Sorry, Tim. I'm missing a slide here. Okay, so Tim Ominika. Tim has been working in the area of opioid dependency and harm reduction for the past 11 years. He's currently working with the Thunderbird Partnership Foundation, where he holds the position of community-based researcher, assisting with the National Research Project. He's graduated from the Police Foundation in 2001, received a BA in Law and Justice in 2004, and also a harm reduction certificate from York University in 2012. In 2011, he received an opioid dependency treatment certificate from the University of Toronto.
Tim, I think that we have a technical problem with Nancy. So if you want to take the mic and do the presentation, we will be back with Nancy after. Thank you very much.
Oh, great. Thank you. I thought I was having technical difficulties on my side here. Sorry. You guys could hear me okay?
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, well, sorry for Nancy having some technical difficulties. Well, good morning, everyone. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Tim Ominika. My Anishinaabe Noswin, so that's my native language that was given to me is Swanagik, Maingan Dodem, which means red otter. And I'm from the Wolf Clan. I reside here in Wikwemakaw territory, located in Manitoulin Island. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak on behalf of Thunderbird Partnership Foundation. And I just want to recognize and acknowledge the territory that we are currently presenting on. Also, the previous presenters really enjoyed those presentations. So much for that. Thank you for that. Okay, next slide, please. So some of the things I'll discuss, I know I only have 20 minutes. Some of my colleagues are on the line on the call this morning. They know I love to speak, and I'm very passionate about this work that I've been working around about opioid services and accessing supports for Indigenous populations nationally. So I'll try to get through this as quick as I can. And if there's any questions and comments at the end, I'll be more than happy to answer those. So thank you so much. Next slide, please. So again, Thunderbird Partnership Foundation, I started working with them about 1.5 years ago. Very greatly honored to work with this national recognized organization, working with a great team of on a research platform. This is some of our visions. So, you know, to cultivating and empowering relationships that connect us with our cultural strengths, identity, with a holistic and healthy communities. So that's our vision, our mission, which is stated there. Thunderbird Partnership Foundation is the leading cultural center voice, advocating, collaborating, integrating, and holistic approach and healing and wellness. And again, you know, being honored to work for Thunderbird Partnership Foundation. I'm also a political representative in our First Nation community here. I hold our deputy chief position. So I held that position since 2014. And really understanding working in Indigenous communities, the advocacy work that has to come along and addressing opioid dependencies that are currently providing a lot of challenges, not only in First Nation communities, but you know, in urban, rural, and even nationally and internationally, how this is impacting everybody all over the world, more so during the COVID pandemic. So it's really, I'm so grateful to be working with Thunderbird Partnership Foundation, which is, you know, the leading culturally centered voice addressing all these areas of concern amongst First Nation communities nationally. So, you know, and recognizing the importance of sitting at a political position, seeing firsthand what happens at a leadership table and how we are trying to work collaboratively with external service providers, internal providers, to try to address this overwhelming concern that are impacting all of us. Next slide, please. So these are some of the frameworks in which Thunderbird follows, and you know, by viewing these three frameworks have been worked amongst individuals nationally. So, you know, getting everybody's input on at a First Nation perspective. So the middle one there, the First Nations mental wellness continuum, you know, it was a national framework addressing mental wellness amongst First Nations in Canada, you know, which identifies ways to enhance services, coordinating amongst various systems and supports, culturally safe delivery of services. You know, the framework was developed through collaboration between Assembly of First Nations, Health Canada, First Nation Inuit Health Branch, and again, Thunderbird Partnership Foundation. The next one there, honoring our strengths, you know, it was something that was really recognized at the AFN Health Forum in 2011. You know, it was a renewed framework to address substance use amongst First Nation peoples in Canada, outlines a comprehensive continuum of services and supports, inclusive of multiple jurisdictions, you know, partnership and strengths and community. So, you know, looking at these frameworks really is building that collaborative approach on how to address and provide a service delivery amongst First Nation populations nationally. And by looking at these, you know, you start to really look at how you try to decolonize opioid services and supports, not only Indigenous populations, but, you know, working amongst other service deliveries with external service providers, such as physicians, doctors, pharmacists. So I'll speak later on that as we get through some of the slides. The other one, Indigenous Wellness Framework, you know, focuses on the purpose, hope, belonging, and meaning. You know, so, you know, you look at the frameworks, and we're looking at like the medicine wheel, in which our First Nations populations really, it's like our true belief system, you know, looking at the physical, mental aspects of our wellness, and that Indigenous Wellness Framework is really based around that. You know, and then you look at some of those areas that we're looking at when we're doing this work. Focus on some of the research, policy, knowledge translations and training, and network and partnership. So, you know, building this, these frameworks really lets us understand how we could work collaboratively amongst each other in a First Nation setting, but also how to build those relationships outside of First Nation communities, which we find is a very key component for great service delivery opportunities, not only for Indigenous populations, but, you know, as we learn and build these relationships with external service providers outside of our communities, because, you know, as we do understand, everybody is having these difficulties accessing supports nationally. So, you know, when we're collaboratively work amongst each other, these frameworks we really feel are really strengthening these relationships as we get through these difficult times. Next slide, please. So the next few slides, what I'll speak about is something that I really I helped create in our First Nation community. Our community was an abstinence-based community years ago, and through my work and some of my observation when I was working with our local police force, really recognizing and understanding some of the impacts it was having when we were apprehending individuals in our community, where a lot of the issues was around substance use, substance misuse, domestic violence. And these individuals were just getting incarcerated, and it was majority of the times it was because of they're getting apprehended because they're under the influence of some form of substance or alcohol. So I was really understanding, why is this happening? Why wasn't there really no reintegration for these individuals that are coming back? Because they were just continuing to reoffend. So I took it upon myself to look at this other opportunity in our First Nation community, which was working in a social service department. And there was really no collaboration of work in our First Nation community. And I really recognized some of the challenging times what was happening was individuals were having difficulty with opioid dependency. And our community was really not understanding what that type of addiction was. So I was a strong advocate in coming into our First Nation community, really addressing how we have to accommodate and support individuals that require this type of treatment. It was very challenging to get our community to really accept what was happening, because again, in our community, it was very difficult for them to actually understand how we could support these individuals. Some of their observation or what they wanted to do was kind of just ask those individuals to go to a treatment center, or ask them to go and like on the land or on an island, just try to isolate them and get them away from our community. And I said, that's not going to work. This is how this will work. So when I looked at this, we tried to develop, and we looked at developing a community hub for service, and really found that this was a very key role, and how it really impacted the service delivery that is currently happening in our community, in which I have this great opportunity to work with Thunderbird Partnership Foundation and try to provide some of these work experiences that I really observed in our First Nation community moving forward. Okay, next slide, please. So this is one of the things what happened. So our previous speaker, I believe it was Hazel, when she talked about opioids, and I really have that strong advocacy and belief about how we have to support individuals who are having difficulty with opioid dependency. And one of the things was our community members had to travel at least 45 minutes one way just to get opioid treatment. And what I really recognized was some of these challenging, what was happening with these individuals, they were going to see a physician, they had to get on a bus every day. And I said, there has to be a different way to accommodate these individuals who require this treatment. And our community members that weren't on this form of treatment were really talking negatively about these individuals. And I said, you have to understand what these individuals are going through. It's not like an alcohol dependency. We do have an ADAP program in our First Nation community here, which what I said earlier was abstinence-based community. And they were totally opposed to this type and form of treatment. So what I really did was I advocated and fought for having this collaborative approach where we brought an opioid antagonist treatment center into our First Nation community, and I fought and advocated for that. Speaking at our leadership table, I wasn't sitting as our deputy chief at the time, but I went and I found that individuals that needed this support, in order for them to get better treatment, we needed it in our community, because what I found was once we did that work and brought that clinic into our First Nation community, they were able to access more services to address their needs, because when they were going out of town, all that they were addressing was the physical dependency that they were having and trying to get rid of their withdrawal symptoms. So by having it locally in our First Nation community, it allowed them to access more supports, accessing our social service department and accessing our knowledge keepers, going to ceremonies, because they spent the majority of their time on a bus. So that was a very hard thing to convince our community to do. I was always getting talk negatively about, why are you doing this? You're advocating for substance use. I said, no, you have to understand, this is why we're doing this. And one of the things what happened was I wouldn't really get support on this initiative that I was pursuing, but until somebody was physically affected by it. So let's say a family member who was really opposing this form of treatment didn't really accept or acknowledge this type of treatment. They wanted to go abstinence-based, but if it personally affected them, let's say if their child or one of their siblings were having issues with substance misuse around opioids, then they would come and ask me, how could we help my child? How could we help my brother? And I said, this is what we are doing. So I start educating. So that's what I found. Education was the biggest key component of trying to recognizing what we got to do to work collaboratively to address these issues. Unfortunately, that's what was happening. And so when we were looking at this, when we were trying to build these gaps between community and provincial services, I really recognized that that type of service that was offered outside of our community in the rural urban setting wasn't really accommodating what we were actually going through in our community. So that's when we brought it into our First Nation community to work with the physicians, pharmacists, and building a whole holistic approach of treatment. Next slide, please. So here it is again. So this was some of the things what we really focused on. And I really want to acknowledge and recognize Thunderbird Partnership Foundation and our research team for putting these slides together as we work together to put this for our viewers to really understand how this really works amongst our First Nation communities. And it's been worked collectively amongst all those frameworks that were developed within our organization. So when we look at this community hub for service, this was something that was really missing. What I was really viewing. So individuals who had to travel daily to get their opioid, their synthetic medication, either it be methadone or buprenorphine, there wasn't some of these areas that were being addressed. So what I looked at through my studies, and I looked at a holistic approach, how we could really work together in a First Nation setting, was incorporating that cultural component, because what we really viewed and was understanding was they were really missing, there's a lot of intergenerational trauma being affected by these individuals. So what I recognized through our intake process, a lot of these individuals were affected by residential school. Either they were a third generation or second or third generation individuals who were affected by residential treatment. So that's when I said, okay, culture has to be brought back into this, start to get them grounded again. And then we included the withdrawal management services, which was an organization outside of the community, which we brought in. So that's when I looked at working at this collaborative approach, how to address these issues. Individuals were having difficulty with opioid dependency. The harm reduction service, which I brought into community, which was having that opioid antagonist treatment clinic into the First Nation. But again, working collaboratively with the doctor and pharmacist, it wasn't just going to be run as a physician doing consultation and then issuing a prescription, and then the pharmacist, which is listed here, issues out that medication. We built this all around how individuals had to access a form of counseling supports within this hub for service. So they couldn't just come in, see the doctor through a consult, get a prescription written, go to the pharmacist releases that medication. We built this holistic approach around that, where in order to continue the service that you're accessing, you had to try to eventually build in the have this cultural component a part of the form of treatment, because again, we knew the underlying issues that were happening was through my intake process was really understanding these individuals are having difficulty with trauma, and trauma is one of the big key factors why individuals were leading towards substance misuse. And then the land-based programming. This was something that I'm a outdoor enthusiast. I go hunting a lot. I do a lot of outdoor activities, and I found this was a great form of treatment also on the other side, on the mental aspect, to address these issues. Oops, sorry, I'm gonna turn this phone off. So land-based programming, what we included in this form of treatment, we found was very impactful, and we've seen there was positive results outcoming of these individuals accessing this form of treatment. I was also a part of a research project with Northern Ontario School of Medicine, working collaboratively with Laurentian University, which is a university in Sudbury, Ontario, where we looked at doing a research project around opioid antagonist treatment and incorporating land-based programming as a form of mental wellness and how it impacts these individuals. And we found some positive outcomes of this, where individuals had started to overcome their opioid dependency and actually started getting weaned off of this medication and building their relationships with families, and also getting back into the workforce, going back to school, getting their children back. And, you know, once we found that land-based programming and including the culture components was so impactful, our community really started to recognize, wow, this harm reduction approach is really working. And that's where I wanted to lead towards this presentation. And what we're doing here today is how our NADAP programming, which was a abstinence-based program, how they really accepted and recognized a harm reduction approach is really beneficial. And our NADAP program actually started revamping their policies and started allowing residential treatment, allowing individuals that were coming in that required opioid antagonist treatment to be a resident within their facility. As before, it was just abstinence-based, and they were totally against a harm reduction approach years ago. But now, when we look at this hub for services, how we could work collaboratively amongst each other, they really understood and recognized, wow, this is how the next phase of addressing treatment is how we got to move towards. Next slide, please. And here it is again, harm reduction in our community. So I'm always getting ahead of myself. I'm trying to speak fast because I know I only have 20 minutes. Sorry. Next slide. So here it is right here, harm reduction in our community. So this was some of the things what I really fought for and advocated for at the time was when I spoke about our NADAP program. So, you know, the diagrams that are displayed here, which is listed, which our great team of Thunderbird has put together, you know, including that harm reduction approach, cultural and traditions, because we are looking at this where individuals were going through these challenging times within their lives. Really understanding you have to really acknowledge, recognize, and accept what's happening in front of you. And by doing so, you know, that's when you have to start breaking down those barriers that are, those blinders that are put in front of us. You know, sometimes when we're looking and trying to build, address issues in our community, we're just looking like this, right? But you got to take those off once in a while and then looking at this harm reduction approach. And a harm reduction approach gives you those other options on how you try to incorporate everything together, because it was all abstinence-based in previous years. And that's what everybody was accustomed to. Whenever somebody was having difficulty with substance misuse, they would just either, you know, go to residential treatment. That's going to help you. But sometimes, you know, sometimes the succession rate is really too high, not based upon the program delivery, but it's because of other supports outside of the treatment model that is currently happening. So that's when you try to look at those previous slides I had there, the hub for service, when you have to incorporate, it's a community issue what's happening. It's not just an individual issue. So when you incorporate that harm reduction approach in a community, that's when you really recognize everybody has to come together to address these individual needs. And I can't just really say it's Indigenous populations, it's everybody in general. You know, looking at urban settings, you know, there's a lot of overdose. Unfortunately, a lot of people succumb to opioid deaths, more in particular during COVID. And now you really recognize and see that the provincial and federal government is looking at more ways of supporting these types of areas that are really being tragically happening in our communities, not only in our urban center, but in our rural communities too. So when you look at this harm reduction approach, you got to build these relationships. And, you know, we're looking at First Nation populations, but also, you know, Francophones and everybody in general. You got to build in those cultural teachings or those teachings, that those belief systems that those individuals are really having. So, you know, when we're looking at this form of treatment, you have to look at building these relationships in a positive patience and communication and meeting the individual needs. So, you know, more so now, I think it's just opened the eyes of everybody of how impactful this opioids are affecting everybody, because it's not just the same synthetic medication that's been produced in a pharmaceutical manner, but also like the underground market where these drugs are being laced with so toxicity where it's very dangerous for everybody. Next slide, please. So these are one of the things what our Thunderbird Partnership Foundation has been doing. And one of the work my colleague and I have been working very closely on is this First Nation opioid methamphetamine survey. So it's a national survey that we're doing nationally for First Nations across Canada. And it's funded by PHAC, Public Health Access Canada. So we're looking at to deliver these surveys in First Nation communities to get a better understanding of what's currently happening in our communities. Originally, it was around opioids, but then now we started recognizing that methamphetamine was being increased, being used more so as much as opioids in our communities. So these surveys that we started doing really looks at what's impacting our First Nation communities, how we could look at properly supporting these First Nation communities that are happening. Oh, okay. I thought someone says we're taking a break. Sorry. So these surveys really give us a great understanding of what's happening within our communities, and being funded by Public Health Canada gives these First Nation communities a better opportunity when they're applying for funding to address those needs in those communities. Next slide, please. So here they are right here. There's the adult and youth model. So, we're trying to get the understanding what the youth are being observant in our First Nation communities and the adults. One of the things that we were really looking at is trying to get our youth to fill out these surveys, because they're the ones who are really seeing firsthand and getting exposed at that young, early age, what's happening in our communities. Sure, the adults really see what's happening, but we really want to encourage our youth to participate in this survey, because it will give us that understanding of what's happening. So it shows the age that we are currently working with is 12 to 17, and then the adult is 18 and plus. And through our studies and research, we started really recognizing people are getting exposed or experimenting with these substances at a very young age, even as young as 10, unfortunately. It's not only in First Nation communities, I think it's happening right across the board. So these surveys that we are doing in our First Nation communities is really showing to be impactful and really empowering these First Nation communities to really understand what's happening right in front of them. And so these are the surveys that Thunderbird's doing nationally to really assist and support these communities moving forward. Next slide, please. So these are some of the aims right here: understanding, identity, promote, and support and inform. So, going through some of these things, what I just spoke to previously is really understanding what's happening around opioids, methamphetamine, and harm reduction treatment options, happening within our First Nation communities. So sometimes they don't really acknowledge or support a harm reduction approach, but through these surveys, when we're doing these, they really understand, wow, we really need this type of support in our communities, because the other treatment options, unfortunately, not degrading or downgrading them, but aren't really working. So that's when you have to build that community as a hub to really look at how you're going to address this collectively, what's happening in our First Nation communities. And then the identity piece, strengthening in the community, as well as the risk and protecting factors of opioids. Again, these surveys that we have been doing really is a great eye-opener to see what's actually happening. People who are all abstinence-based minded may look at these community reports that are developed based upon the surveys and really say, wow, this is happening in our community. I really didn't understand. And then they become to support these type of service delivery options that are right in front of us, and that community members or service providers have been trying to advocate for years. And these surveys really look at opening their eyes and looking at ways to better support issues happening in our communities. Next slide, please. And here's our community reports. So these are some of the findings when you extract all this information. Again, we have a great team of researchers that are doing all this work. Myself, as a community-based researcher, I just go and my other colleague, we go into these communities and we ask to be participants in all of this. And we have another great team on our research team that collects all this data, puts it together into these reports, which really gives a great visual of what's happening. Because again, I don't want to just say First Nation populations are very visual individuals looking at things, but looking at these reports that are presented and provided to the communities, it really, again, looks at understanding what's happening in our communities. Next slide. And here we go again. So these are all of the findings, what happens based upon all of the questions that are being asked in our surveys. And it's a lot of work which happens, but once compiled and once presented, it really gives that First Nation community that opportunity to use these reports for requesting for additional sourced funding, regardless of what the findings are. So, you know, when we look at these opioids use or methamphetamine use, it really, or let's say a First Nation community is looking at increasing there's gaps in services, such as maybe they require more workers within the mental health area, or they require a treatment center, or they require more knowledge keepers to be properly funded to support these addiction or mental health issues happening in our communities. These reports and these surveys and the findings really support and provide that advocacy work when they are submitting with their proposal-based submissions to the provincial and federal governments. And we are finding that we are trying to ask a lot more First Nations to participate in this. But again, you know, if we could utilize some of these reports that we're doing and work collectively with non-Indigenous populations, that would be great, because we know this is happening amongst everybody. But what we've been really recognizing and noticing, these surveys that we are doing around opioids and methamphetamine use is really an eye-opener, more so now than ever, as I spoke earlier, based upon the COVID-19 pandemic that we've been currently having. And I continue to say that to our First Nation communities. It's not only our communities, it's happening globally. And you know, it's very quickly to try to point fingers and say, well, it's only happening in your community or your community. Unfortunately, no, I say it's happening all over. You know, and this is a time where the provincial and federal governments really have to look at supporting and advocating and providing more funding for even non-Indigenous populations to support these issues that are happening in our First Nation communities. I think I might be out of time, but I would love to speak a lot more. And I don't know if we're going to wait for questions and answers later, but I'll be more than happy and welcome to answer any questions that may be asked. And I'd just like to thank the organization for allowing Thunderbird Partnership Foundation to present here, giving us this great opportunity and allowing us to share our information at this platform. Chimiigwech, thank you. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Tim. I apologize for my internet got shut down for a little bit while I was introducing you. So I really apologize. I don't know where it stopped, but I wish I could have done a better job.
I thought it was my technical difficulties because it's happened to me before, and so I thought it was on my end. So I was trying to switch up my internet links here. So
thank you for your presentation. It's while you were talking, I was taking some notes, and you touched on so many important points, addressing stigma, you know, with opioid use disorders, building better connections within the system that we work in, having a collaborative community approach. You know, we've done some of that here in the community, where we're fortunate enough that, you know, we have a doctor in the community, and we can work closely with this doctor. And we also have Dr. Marsan, who's going to be speaking. You know, we have addiction workers like right here in the community as well, mental health support. So working in as a community-based treatment, like we see the positive effects of it. You know, not to say that the issue is resolved, but you know, we are following that model. So again, thank you. We're going to be taking a little break, about 10 minutes. So I have 10:28. And we will be returning at 10, let's say 10:30, to continue with our presentation. Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody back for this last piece of our presentation. I'd like to introduce our next speakers. They will be speaking all together. We have Robin Skye, Travis Gabriel, and Dr. Stéphanie Marsan. Robin Skye is working at the as an addiction counselor with the Onentokon Healing Lodge in Ganessadage. She's been working there for 14 years, and she's held the position of outreach worker for 12 years. And has enjoyed working with Indigenous and Inuit people who face difficulty and met challenges with diversity and resiliency. She's been like I said, a residential counselor, and this position has allowed Robin to connect with clients during their treatment stay, and also to support them in accompany them through their journey. Since the height of the COVID pandemic, Onontogo Healing Lodge and their staff have been offering virtual sessions. So they've adapted their program in order to offer, like I said, these virtual sessions to participants. So then we have Travis Gabriel, who will also be presenting. He's been in the field of addiction for 15 years, and he's also worked in the corrections system at the federal and provincial level to work with Indigenous populations dealing with substance use. Travis carries both professional experience and cultural knowledge, uniquely combining aspects of both worldviews to help individuals in recovery. We also have Dr. Stéphanie Marsan, who will be joining this presentation. She's a clinical assistant professor and director of the Advanced Competence Program in Drug Addiction Medicine at the Université de Montréal. And Dr. Stéphanie Marsan is also a physician in the Department of Addiction Medicine at the CHUM, the Centre Hospitalier de l'Université de Montréal. She works closely with Indigenous communities and community organizations like ours, as well as provincial and federal organizations in order to increase accessibility to drug addiction medicine. So thank you, and I will be giving them the floor for their presentation.
Bonjour, my name is Stéphanie Marsan, and I work at the Centre Hospitalier de l'Université de Montréal, which is located in the heart of downtown Montreal. Our addiction medicine service consists of an outpatient clinic, which provides outpatient withdrawal management, opioid agonist therapy, and hepatitis C screening and treatment. We also have a consultation service that supports patients admitted to the hospital and dealing with substance use issues. And finally, we have a 10-bed medical inpatient detox unit for patients who are at risk of medical complications due to their substance use. So for many years, our team noticed that Indigenous people were really not very receptive to accessing our services. And when they did, they came at later stages of illness and often left against medical advice, angry and frustrated with the healthcare system. And our healthcare team was also feeling a lot of frustration that they were not able to better connect with these patients. We knew we weren't doing things right, but we didn't know what we were doing wrong. And I remember a particular case where a woman was admitted to our unit for alcohol withdrawal management. She was extremely nervous about being in a hospital setting, away from her community, and amongst strangers who didn't speak her language and didn't really understand her culture. She had brought her beading materials with her in order to help pass the time and also to help manage her anxiety. And this material consists of beads and threads and special beading needles that are very fine and small, as well as some leather and felt. And so she had all this material with her. The thing is that on our unit, we also have addiction psychiatry beds. And because of this, needles are not allowed on the premises as they are seen as potential for harm. So when the nurse saw these needles, they were immediately confiscated without any discussion in order to follow the very strict and rigid institutional protocol. So as a result, the patient left very angry with more trauma and more mistrust toward the healthcare system. So shortly after that, the Native Friendship Center contacted us and wanted to organize some cultural sensitivity training with their team. And this is where we met Onontogo's Healing Lodge's outreach worker, who at the time was Robin Sky. And with her guidance and her support, we realized that we really lacked an understanding of the Indigenous perspective on healing, of the huge effects of colonization on Indigenous people, and of the different values, different beliefs and cultures. To top it all off, we were not connected to any of the Indigenous community organizations. We were working alone. And so for these patients that we were following, they were falling through the cracks. So when Onentokon contacted us about partnering to work together in 2013, we jumped at the chance to work with them. And in 2015, we signed a memorandum of understanding. So we would provide rapid access to medical support in opioid agonist therapy, in harm reduction and withdrawal management. And Onentokon would continue to help us with cross-cultural training and also support our team and our Indigenous clients who were in the hospital and who might need Onentokon services. And, that's when things started to change. Onentokon was able to provide care to clients who had much more severe substance use issues, including those with opioid use disorder who needed methadone and Suboxone. And with their guidance, we changed our protocols, we put in new programs, and we noticed that our Indigenous patients were staying for the full length of stay. They were coming back for their follow-up appointments. They were referring family and friends, and Indigenous community organizations started to contact us for case discussions and referrals. So thanks to Onentokon and to other Indigenous community organizations like KSES, we've been able to put new programs in place to meet the needs of Indigenous people. So I would just like to say, or to end by saying that we are so grateful for this partnership, because it's really helped us to gain a better understanding of the issues. And together, I think we've really done a good job of improving services and increasing access to addiction care. But more importantly, I think it's really made us better caregivers. And that being said, our addiction service is far from perfect. We still have a lot to learn. There's still a lot that needs to change, but I would like to think that we're on the right path. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Nyawa.
Thank you, Stephanie. So my name is Robin Sky. My Mohawk name is Teosirate. And following what Dr. Marsan already said about being caregivers, as well as on our end, we are also in relationship to all those institutions such as emergency care, policing, the hospitals, the detox units, who are also caregivers. And so we are in relationship at different times, at different points in a client's experience. And it can be very distressful, very traumatic, very, very brief, because when somebody is misusing or chronic polyusing substances, including opiates, our interactions sometimes are so time specific that the words we say and how we approach and how we provide that interaction is so important and critical. And that's the relationship that we've been able to develop with the CHUM, with the withdrawal management team, with their physicians, the psychiatrists, the social workers that are also part of that unit. Even just the learning on both sides of, Indigenous workers who are based in reserve on community, which is what we are. Onentokon Healing Lodge is based in Kahnawake, which is about an hour outside of Montreal. And Kahnawake is 10 minutes away from Montreal. So we're different in terms of distance, but we share the same family services. We interact a lot, along with, how the other speakers spoke. Nakuset, from being the director of the Montreal Native Women's Shelter, we've been in relationship with them for many years, and how we've been able to service our clientele and do referral and follow up and contact back to home communities sometimes is repeated. Clients will return to Montreal or to big urban areas for many reasons, and it could involve medical, it could involve giving birth, coming for a funeral, gathering with family who are studying in the city, and we tend to gather a lot. So that includes the homeless and transient populations, where the majority of our clientele that we see in outreach, we're seeing them second and third generation in our in-house residential program. So we've known families for many years, maybe 30 years. Onontoko's been in existence for 35 years now. And it's by word of mouth. When you talk to somebody and you treat somebody with care and compassion, they're gonna repeat that and tell somebody else, hey, I went to that unit, that hospital, and this is how I was treated. And if it was a good experience, then there's going to be people that are going to want to have that same experience, and familiarity is really key. And since working at Onontoko Healing Lodge, we've really been on a learning curve with the opiate agonist treatment therapies. We were fortunate, or we were not exposed to the extent of the opioid crisis that many other places were. For whatever reason, it kind of crossed over us, but we felt the need to learn and to become prepared. And we developed this partnership with Dr. Marsan, who was really integral and really key to, she just has that caring nature and is very open and warm and inviting. And this is what we wanted to develop more, and be able to educate ourselves as well on best practices and how do we, build that partnership and keep it growing and keep it going. And it was really difficult to do that during the pandemic period, because we are a small community and we are, an hour away. Our services did not operate in our residential programming. So we physically were limited, and we had to, recreate and go through and develop a virtual program, still keeping in contact with, those important services, such as the CHUM, such as Resilience, Cabot Square, Kahnawake Community Services, as well as partnerships with the Native Friendship Center, First Peoples Justice Center, Native Parajudicial Services, and the Montreal policing units. There's still a need to work together in that harms reduction approach, because that's where we're at. And initially, Onontoko started off as an abstinence model, and the residential treatment was based on the 12-step Minnesota model. And we've really evolved and moved towards a more cultural, holistic approach, because we see the need. And in working with the CHUM, Stephanie mentioned about that client that brought her beadwork, and this is something very, very important, because beadwork, craft work is healing for a person who's in pain, emotional pain, psychological pain, and even though they're withdrawing physically, limited ability to do the beadwork, just that connection of having that ability to create and to design and to work with their hands, it creates that memory, or it brings that memory back of, you know, identity. And that's what we're all wanting, a positive identity, no matter what. And in working as outreach, we were able to utilize beadwork, making medicine pouches in a table in a round setting, men and women at the Native Friendship Center. And during those times, the dialogue and the conversation is very different than in a clinical situation. So we're able to provide education, we're able to provide knowledge and to talk about, you know, if you're thinking of detox, if you're thinking of going to the hospital, this is who you can talk to, this is who you can see, and this is what the physical building looks like. And if you want, we can go there and just look at, you know, go visit. And so we felt that that was important. And Dr. Marsan was a part of that too, along with workers from the Native Friendship Center. So doing that type of creative work, I think Tim touched on it as well, you know, we're community-based as much as possible, even in urban settings, and trying to look at harms reductions approaches in a holistic way. So we're still in that development. We're still continuing to do those things and hoping to reach, you know, more clients as we now are opening our doors. So Onentokon will be having residential clients again within 2 weeks. And, you know, we hope to build on our partnerships. So I'll stop here because I know Travis has more to add. Nyao goa.
Thanks, Robin. So I know we did have a couple of people who weren't able to make it here today, so I don't know exactly how much time we have left here. But jokingly, I did say if the music started playing much like on the Oscars, I would continue and I would stay on stage. So we'll see what happens here. So Onentokon Healing Lodge, it started actually in 1987 as Onentokon Treatment Services. And as Robin mentioned, it was abstinent-based in the 12-step model approach, right? And Tim, you did a wonderful job. I just got to say this, you did a wonderful job presenting the notion of bias and stigma towards addiction in general. In realizing or in evolving our procedures, our policies, our methods, in making the move from the Minnesota model, the 12-step approach towards trauma-focused and client-driven, we became aware of how significantly stigma impacted a client's identity. So not only were we looking at the trouble or the difficulties that were driving the use of substance and the addiction or substance use disorder, we were now looking at the community view, community belief, the family ideas towards drug use, and it was directed towards the individual. So you had somebody who was using for whether it be physical pain and they were on a pharmaceutical management, and they became addicted to a substance that they weren't expecting, or it was through recreational use or emotional pain management. They now had the additional stigma of getting into one of those quote unquote heavier drugs and being viewed as one of those, again, quote unquote, one of those drug users, which is, it's a very strong impact when you get to know the story that an individual is carrying. And myself, I evolved in my profession to become aware that everybody carries a story. It's my job, it's my responsibility to be present, to learn what that story is, non-judgmentally, fully accepting of where the client is in their journey. Under the old 12-step model, we kind of conducted ourselves as if we knew what the best course of action was for the client. And I'm saying this as an addictions counselor. This is exactly how I approached it in the past. Because of my training, because of my specialty, because of where I was at in my profession, I knew what the client needed to do. And so if I presented the material, if I presented a way of life, as long as the client would live this, they would have a successful outcome. Myself, thanks to the organization that I'm working with, coming into the organization at a time when they were making the shift from the Minnesota model towards a trauma-focused, trauma-aware, and client-driven, I realized the need for such an evolution, to really appreciate the journey and just be present and allow the client to be themselves, allow the client to live in their reality and to foster hope, really. And that's a powerful teaching moment right there, that addiction, substance use disorder, the impact, there's not, if you look at an individual, there's not a great deal of hope in that moment. It's our role to be caregivers, to be compassionate, to be supportive, and to foster hope, encourage maintenance and growth, and educate the client, ourselves, communities, family members within the organization, ourselves. We continue to evolve. And I really believe that that's how that works now. Addiction or substance use disorder is a continually evolving thing. It's a continually evolving animal where we have to continually grow. We can never go back to the old methods of we learn about addiction and we teach best practices to the client, and as long as they do what we say, they'll have a good life. It didn't work that way. I can say this, under that model, we had about a 35% client retention rate and a high recidivism over the years. In moving towards trauma focused, we went from 35% retention rate to where we were seeing 90% and then eventually 100% retention rate in our graduation, and in terms of continuance of care, we were hearing reports back from caregivers and clients on a continued success, even if there were struggles involved. So we were definitely seeing a good movement and a good shift in the quality of care that we were providing and that we were giving, all thanks to education, awareness, and expanding into building community connections with our partner organizations, with the families and out there, and the work towards breaking the cycle of stigma, bias, and leading towards acceptance. So I can say this, over the course of the 34 years that Onentokon has been in business, upwards of 3,500, maybe probably closer to 4,000 clients is what we've serviced. That breaks down, I think, to about 120 something a year annually. So we're doing our best to continue making movements, making a good impact, a good positive impact, good positive outcomes in people's lives. I believe my time is just about up here. I might have gone over, but I thank you all very much for looking to us, the Indigenous community, for participating in this very important discussion. And I would like to leave you on this note, that although we are Indigenous and we are presenting our realities to you, our best practices can easily fit any person, any nationality, any family of the world, because we are all human beings. So I leave you with that in peace and friendship. I thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Dr. Marsan. Again, you touched on a lot of very important topics around, rapid access to services, the importance of building really good relationships, solid relationships with our partners and communities. Travis, you talked about fostering hope. So all of these things, I think, we keep in mind. We hope that we keep in mind in moving forward and continuing this work that we all do. So that wraps up the speakers, the speaker presentations. Robin Skye will be doing the closing address for us, and then we're going to be moving on to the question and answer period. So I will leave the floor to Robin.
So earlier in the program, we had opening words, and because we, shared so much care and compassion, and we're on a global platform, it was already mentioned that, we are family of the world, and we've come together today to bring our minds to be of one good mind, and to share the knowledge, and to provide, I hope, some feelings of empowerment to those that were able to tune in today. And so we want to close that meeting of everyone in a good way as well, that, we're going on different journeys today. We have other commitments that maybe is stressful today, that we have family commitments and things that were unexpected. And so we're going to go off into our daily routine, but I just want to share that I hope everyone is able to have the best day possible, that, the medicine, this is our medicine, is the feeling that you're feeling right now and what you've heard this morning, what you've been able to share. It's very good. And thank you also very much for joining us. Goa, Tiagwe, Ganikurio, Yawa, Ona.
Yeah, Robin. So we're going to be moving on to the question and answer period. I would invite all the speakers to now reactivate your cameras, but just keep your mics closed. Questions will be received from the audience during, the questions that we're now receiving from the audience can be directed or towards all the speakers, and sometimes they may be directed specifically at one speaker, which at that point you just have to turn your mic on. We'll have about, I'd say, 15 minutes for questions. So I will be reading the questions from what I understand. So we have a question here saying, how many people do you support each year, and what is the prevalence of addictions in your community, or how is the prevalence of addictions in your community measured? So I don't know who wants to answer that question.
Well, I don't know who the question was specifically directed to. It's not. Okay, so I think I touched a little bit on that in my closing remarks, where I'm estimating, I don't have the figures in front of me, but about 120 clients annually when we're working at full capacity. That's when we're working at full capacity in a perfect world. Of course, COVID being what it is has not been perfect. We've done our absolute best. So that's what Onentokon is really capable of servicing. What's the prevalence of addiction, or how's addiction viewed in the community? Is that what the question was? The follow-up?
The question was, is the prevalence of addiction in your community measured?
That's a difficult question, I think, for many Native communities, because one, you're looking at the stigma. How many people are willing to admit, first of all, that they are beyond, that they're overwhelmed, or that they're facing something that's beyond their control? We are, certainly to admit an addiction would be to admit that I'm using substance for something, which usually means I have to disclose a trauma story somewhere along the line. And we're programmed with our survival instincts to hide from that kind of thing. As human beings, we don't like to air that kind of reality, especially if it's the first time we're ever experiencing addiction. So how things are tracked, you would only necessarily get a good sense of that, let's say, through a place like Onentokon, who has to do some financial reports towards their the funding to associates and things like that. But on the ground, it's a very difficult number to follow, I think.
Yeah, and I would
add the question. Oh. I think I'm looking in the chat that said it was directed to me. So I guess my only answer to that is that we are not fortunate as Tim's team, that from the Partnership Foundation, we don't have a research team here, and so we wouldn't have actual percentage of clients that are specific to the opioid use. So I don't know, I don't want to give a number because I don't have an accurate number to give, because we have stats, but it's not the same as the type of research that Tim's team had, what he presented. So maybe Tim would have more information about that, because I myself personally wouldn't have a number to give for that question. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that, Hazel and Travis. Yeah, with the research project that we are currently doing, it is coming to an end in 2022. So based upon the survey implementation in the First Nation communities nationally, there is going to be a national data aggregate going to get put together. And unfortunately, it won't give a full disclosure of the numbers. It will give us a snapshot of what's currently happening nationally within First Nations across Canada, because again, the surveys that we are implementing is voluntary, and not everybody fills them out in our First Nation communities. But it will give us an idea of some of the numbers. And I want to speak kind of echo what Travis was saying. It is difficult to get some of those numbers in a First Nation community setting, because again, some of those individuals don't want to come forth and really address that they're going through some substance misuse challenges. Even within our First Nation community, I could speak about the opioid antagonist treatment clinic in our community. We have 130 individuals accessing that service. That's just within our community alone. That number has increased over the years. And I think that's probably just the tip of the iceberg who are accessing this type of service delivery, because again, within our First Nation community, and probably even in the urban settings, individuals who may be having challenges with opioid dependency, who are employed, may be afraid that may affect some of their employment status, which may cause them to either get some reprimanded for their use, so they're afraid to kind of disclose that information. Some of the things what we did in our community, again, I sit at the leadership table as our deputy chief, also as really working on having a EAP program implemented within our community to support individuals and allow them to come forward to support their substance dependencies. Since we've been doing that and really having a political statement at the community level, recognizing that there are these issues in our community that opens the door for those individuals to come forward and access this form of treatment. Either it be even at abstinence-based setting also, not just a harm reduction approach. So those are some of the things that we did offer within our community. But again, the surveys that we're doing at a research standpoint is going to give us I think a good number as to what's currently happening. And that's why we are really trying to encourage a lot of communities nationally to participate, and which would give us a better understanding and how much more support is really required to address these the opioids that are currently happening in our communities. And then I see another question there. Has it increased? Oh, definitely. Just based upon the surveys that we have been doing nationally and viewing it and sitting at a leadership political position in our community, it has increased drastically for sure. We have seen a number of overdose deaths, or even overdose, not really too much deaths in our community, but when if you listen to the news globally and you hear what has been happening during this pandemic, yes, definitely it has increased. I don't want to speak for everybody else, but I think we're on the same page at that. We do see this increase in numbers for sure. But at a research standpoint, again, coming when we put this national data aggregate report together next year, we will have some numbers to actually present those findings.
Tim, this one is for you as well. This person is wondering if is opioid use perceived differently from alcohol or other drug use by the members of the community outside of the treatment teams? If so, in what way?
Is opioid use, say again, sorry?
So is opioid use perceived differently than other, I guess, substances?
Yes, it has been for sure over the past number of years. And again, yes, based upon communicating with First Nation communities, it's not only within just one First Nation community. Yeah, it is what I've been observing and listening to, it is perceived differently. And again, that's when you have to really have that inclusive education component piece for those First Nation communities. So when we are doing some of this surveys or collecting data, it really gives us that understanding to relay that to that First Nation community of what's needed to properly educate and give an understanding to a whole collective within those communities. But to answer that question, yes, it is perceived differently. And again, I'll use my personal experience by sitting at a leadership table. It's been a very difficult road for sure to really educate our First Nation community members that it is different, but really speaking that we have to address these collectively and almost the same too, right? You can't just pick one over the other. And it's just, I think that education piece that really needs to be stressed within our communities, but again, nationally. And I think we've been viewing and hearing this at the media level, as we have been recognizing and noticing there has been a lot more money being increased supporting in these initiatives that moving forward. And I think it's just coming out more that they really require additional services and supports addressing opioids.
Thank you. Our next question. Sorry. This person is wondering, what is the role of the healer in the community? And as a sub-question, in your opinion, how can we in hospital healthcare, as hospital healthcare professionals working in Montreal, for example, be complementary to the healer's interventions?
I can answer part of that as well, just as being an outpatient worker. A part of my role is to encourage the client to be in touch with the healer that is of their liking or of their understanding, or someone that they connect well with, and just helping that process of translating that information from incorporating, kind of that Western and traditional modalities in this terms of language. Sometimes it's just really changing words from a clinical word into more of a healing word. So it's just in helping in that process that the information is retained and is encouraged and supported. I think that Dr. Marsan had a beautiful example of what that means culturally for someone to be like, in following with the example of beadwork. What does that that metaphorically, how would that help in terms of healing? So there's just language and then supporting that that communication.
I believe we have time for at least one more question. It's in French, so I'm going to read it in French. I'm hoping it will be translated automatically for our speakers. Dans l'approche par trauma en thérapie, aborde-t-on davantage les traumas individuels ou collectifs et comment fait-on pour aborder tel trauma dans un court laps de temps sans créer encore plus de mal? Comment assure-t-on le suivi?
I didn't actually get the translation of that.
Oh, okay.
I apologize.
So basically, I mean, I can translate it for you. Just bear with me. So basically, what I believe what the question is saying is, is kind of opening up trauma in therapy something that sometimes is more difficult, depending on also the fact that there's not lots of time normally in therapy, right? So most therapies inpatient anyways will be 4 to 6 weeks. So sort of how does that impact on the individual, and does that sometimes cause more harm?
Excellent question. That's actually a very beautiful question. So and it kind of ties in, I think, with the previous question of what is the role of a healer? Because our role here, residentially, normally we're 6 weeks. We can't in 6 weeks undo a lifetime of trauma. It's impossible. What we can do is we can be present for the current trauma. And what we can also do is provide the safe environment to allow the healing to take place, while at the same time give the client, give the person the teaching tools, the coping mechanisms, and everything that they're going to need to kind of self-regulate and foster good self-care, for the post-therapy. So does it ever come to a point where opening trauma does more harm? It can happen. Absolutely, it can. And you rely on your skills as a therapist at that point in time, or as a clinician, or as a healer, or as a human being. Whatever your role might be, you rely on your instinct to kind of gauge where can you go and where should you stop? Where should you kind of avoid? I don't like the word avoid, but it's there, right? If you sense that things are becoming overwhelming and getting beyond your capacity, there is a way that you can cut that off and start referring to someone who might have that ability. But certainly those two questions for me are linked, they're tied. It's about presence, education, and support.
Thank you.
I hope that made sense.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that, Travis. So yeah, I'll go back to that previous question too, like the role of a healer in our community or in communities. One of the things what I really observed firsthand was that the role of that healer was really to bring back that cultural component which has been missing with individuals, and allowing them to listen and really understanding the teachings again within our community settings. So some of that has been lost over a number of the years because again, their parents, due to intergenerational trauma, where a parent has been exposed to that from years ago, it's just been passed to generations. So the knowledge keeper would come in, the traditional healer, and start reinforcing and bringing those teachings back and getting those individuals grounded again, allowing them to participate in ceremonies, getting to know some of the natural medicines within the First Nation community setting, because there's different medicines in different communities which are used for different types of illnesses. So, what I really observed at opioids, at our opiate antagonist treatment clinic, was bringing those knowledge keepers in to really allow the individuals to participate in that counseling component, not just utilizing the Western way of counseling therapy, but again, incorporating both of them, not really saying, okay, you just got to go to this type of counseling and not this one, just really bringing both of them together. Because again, some of the funding only allows for 6 weeks or whatever, so many sessions, but a knowledge keeper could go for an extended period of time. And then when you talk about, does it open up more trauma with the individuals? We want them to start speaking about some of their challenges that they've been having. And when it does open it up, it doesn't necessarily cause more harm. We're allowing that individual to come and speak and address what's currently happening, and having that knowledge keeper present and available allows that continuation of counseling for that individual, not just for a short period of time where, you open up that traumatic event with that individual and then you said, okay, your sessions are up. But that's how that building relationship with the clinician is able to work collaboratively with a knowledge keeper, because they could just share the information which has been happening and allow that referral process to go to this knowledge keeper to continue the counseling component, which you could incorporate the land-based programming as a form of healing also. So, I love both of those questions, and thank you, Travis, for speaking on some of those too. It really shows the importance of having that collaborative approach when working with individuals who require counseling supports.
I'd like to touch on that as well. I know in connection with Dr. Marsan, the CHUM, there have been times when clients who had to stay for detox or for other chronic illnesses relating to their substance use were in the hospital, and through speaking with the, Dr. Marsan, through the social worker or through the nurse in the triage, whoever was there connecting to that client, we were able to access a healer that they knew. And that's where word of mouth comes into play. Like, communities know who the healers are. And so they'll name them, say, can you get in touch with this person, please? And, almost 100% that healer will travel from their community and go to Montreal and go and spend 5 minutes with that person, offer them a cup of tea. And the word and the language is different than medical terms. So if they're needing to have intravenous medication or some type of, surgery preparation, it's very anxiety provoking, very stressful on the body, and the trauma is there. And that healer or that cup of tea, if that connection is made with the hospital personnel on that level, can reduce that trigger. That trauma can be brought down to a zero just in a few moments by a simple offering of, a cookie, a cracker, a glass of water. It's just the humanistic approach, care and compassion that's needed. But that's the healer can do that.
Thank you, Robin. I don't mean to cut you off, but we're actually running out of time. I want to say thank you to all the participants for joining us today, for all the speakers, all your amazing presentations, the knowledge that you shared. Again, thank you so much. And I also want to acknowledge the members of the scientific committee, the member of the international committee, the members, the team from the Institut Universitaire sur les Dépendances, and the team of diffusion from the CIUS. And also everybody that participating in organizing this webinar. Also the Ministry of Health and Social Services for their contribution to the TDO6 conference. I invite all the viewers to complete the evaluation, which you will be getting by email tomorrow. And also we want to invite you for the next TDO6 webinar, which will take place in the winter of 2022 on the topic of l'impact de la réglementation sur les traitements de la dépendance aux opioïdes. And finally, I would like to invite you to sign up for the mailing list to be the first to know when registration opens up for the next webinar. I believe that is the end of our presentation. And again, thank you. Nyawagoa, merci.
Thank you.